eventually something is coming from China that could be vulnerable. What tool would China use to inflict that pain, right? I mean, putting a export duty on it or something like that is just a little cost. Would they actually restrict exports, like with the rare earth materials, or you know, and really just cutting off the supply would be, I guess, the only thing that would cause that level of discomfort?
Yeah, that's where the limitation on the Chinese side comes in. Um, they are trying to export their way out of this financial and economic recession that they find themselves in right now, right? I mean, they are still hoping that this export model that has helped them in the past would be able to help revive the economy. Now, the problem with relying on an export model is that they cannot just shut off the supply chain to the rest of the world because they need to continue to be the manufacturer for the world, for companies like Apple and automobile industry or whatever industry that depend on the Chinese supply chain. The Chinese leadership cannot say to manufacturers on the ground, say, okay, from now on, you do not export to the United States. That would seriously hurt their business and their own economy. And that's their limitation there. Although China does have a leverage over supply chain, I think instead of a market ban on export to the United States, I think they would pick on various companies that are especially vulnerable to the Chinese supply chain and target those companies instead of across the board. What do I mean by that? Now, take Apple, for example. China has been trying to force the iPhone out of the Chinese markets for some time now, not only due to protectionism, but also data and national security. They don't want people to be using US made or US designed smartphones. So they've been pushing for Huawei phones, for Vivo or Xiaomi. All these Chinese brands, they're gaining market share on Apple in China. So it will be easier for the Chinese government to target specific companies like Apple and to basically put a price tag on or extra tariffs on their supply chain in China, so as to make it even more difficult for Apple to operate and use the supply chain in China. I think that is the smart way, the sort of a targeted sanction that Chinese could impose on individual companies rather than a sort of across the board sanction or ban of exports to the United States. I think the Chinese leadership are looking at those things. Now, you mentioned a very important component, which is critical minerals and rare earths. Right now, China is the dominant supplier and processor for all critical minerals and rare earths. I think last time I looked at the stats, is they dominate more than 90%, 80 to 90% of critical minerals and rare earths are produced and processed in China. Now, what that means is that when it comes to manufacturing of critical semiconductor manufacturing tools, Japan, for example, even though they are one of the leading manufacturers of semiconductor tools in the world, they need to import their critical minerals from China. Now, why is China so good at it? They're not the only supplier or the only place where critical minerals and rare earths could be extracted. The reason why they're so dominant is because they can process them in a very cheap way, in ways that have no regard to environmental concerns like we do. And it is very cheap to buy from China, and they have plenty of resources. But I think that is a huge vulnerability that Western countries have begun to sense a couple years ago, and that is why you see critical minerals alliances are now forming amongst Western countries to look at alternative supplies coming from Canada, Australia, and other regions like the Arctic region, where there are critical mineral resources which one could extract. And there's also talk about a sustainable critical mineral source. Sustainable meaning not only in terms of national security, but sustainable meaning environmentally sustainable. And that is why, companies, U.S. government and allies have been trying to push this idea that if we're going to buy critical minerals, we should buy in from sustainable sources, and we should explore other alternative sources than relying on China. So, but we have not moved fast enough. We're still buying 90% of our critical minerals from China. So China would definitely use that as a leverage. What we've seen is that these prices for these critical minerals like germanium, palladium, they've gone up like 2 to 3 times and will continue to go up because we have not reacted fast enough to find alternative supplies that could replace those from China. And China knows that. And that is going to be continue to be one big vulnerability for us.